Okay, hi, I'm Pete Trewavas and I'm the bass player in the band. That's what I'm mostly known for. I also co-write, we all write together in our studio, and I can play, I'm a multi-instrumentalist, although bass guitar is my main instrument. So I joined Marillion in 1982, and I knew of the band because I come from the town Aylesbury that the band was kind of formed in. And I was originally from Middlesbrough, but I moved to Aylesbury when I was 6 years old, 5 years old maybe. I can't remember, too long ago. And I grew up listening to music. There was a massive rock club called Friars in Aylesbury. So I grew up listening to music and the possibilities to join bands and play live. I did a lot of that before I joined Marillion. And I joined Marillion because they needed a bass player for the tour of Scotland they were going to be doing in the spring of 1982. So I was approached by Fish. I'd met Fish before because we'd talked about, places to play in Aylesbury, because I'd done a lot of concerts in and around the Aylesbury area, and they were looking for places they could play. Places like the Red Lion, Bicester, and the Britannia in Aylesbury, which is where I incidentally saw Marillion with Diz before I joined. And they were interesting. They were an interesting band and they stood out. And part of the reason why they stood out was because Fish was quite a foreboding character, being very tall and very Scottish. And so that made them stand out a bit, and they were doing very interesting things at a time of sort of punk and new wave. So that made them stand out. And yeah, he approached me one day and asked me if I would audition for the band because they needed a bass player. And so I went to they were living in Victoria Street. That's where Fish and Mark were living. And I went and auditioned. And yeah, about half an hour later, I think I was in. And partly that's because I could do what they required, and partly because they needed a bass player and I was there, I think. But yeah, it was a good moment in my life, actually. And one of those situations where you're just in the right place at the right time. Well, my influence is music, really. I'm a huge music lover, always have done. I fell in love with music at an early age and have never stopped. And I listened to all sorts of stuff. The first music I really listened to was jazz music, because my dad was a massive jazz fanatic. He had all sorts of big band music and, Oscar Peterson, piano trios, quartets, all sorts of stuff. And I got introduced to Duke Ellington, which is quite heavy going for big bands. That it's not the kind of lighter side like Glenn Miller or somebody. So I was introduced to a lot of the slightly heavier, darker, more intricate jazz bands. And then, of course, the radio at the time was just the channel. It was called the Light Channel before Radio 1 became a thing. And everything was played on that, from Frank Sinatra to the Beatles, to the Kinks, to goodness knows who else was in the charts. And I grew up listening to all of that, and then, a bit later it was psychedelic music came along, and then rock, Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and all of that. And I just was soaking all of this stuff up like a sponge. So I was influenced from an early age by music. I learned to play guitar when I was about 7, I suppose. And my best friend and I both learnt to play at the same time, and both became professional musicians, which was quite a cool thing, really. I went on to bass guitar because he was a better guitarist than I was, or he was a better lead guitarist than I was. And so I progressed to bass guitar when I was about 12, and I started listening to bass guitar. Paul McCartney was my first real go-to bass guitar player. But then, obviously, I was listening to bands like Focus and Caravan, and then I started listening to Yes. Somebody said, "Oh, you've got to listen to this band, Yes, and this album called Fragile that's just come out," and I was hooked then. I got into progressive music in a massive way. But I did have a brief time of really getting into Alice Cooper. $1 Billion Babies. School's Out was probably the first album I bought of his. And then Killer. I bought Killer because somebody said, oh, if you like School's Out, you like Killer. And it's a bit hard, a bit darker. But they're good, again, good bass playing, melodic bass playing. That's kind of what I was into. I was into good bass lines, looking for stretching myself as a player. And Genesis, Mike Rutherford, of course, a fantastic player. Caravan, I really got into Caravan as well. In the Land of Grey and Pink was a favourite of mine for a while. More recently, I got into Blur, actually, and all of that kind of indie rock, because I grew up on pop music, so indie rock was kind of like, oh, okay, a bit edgy, pop music with an edge, you know, it's pretty cool. Ben Folds 5. I remember that moment. Yeah, it's the kind of moment you have when you're a kid. And I heard the ballad of Who Cares Less, I think it's called, on the second album. And I heard it on the radio, and it's like I couldn't stop. I worked it out on the piano, and I couldn't stop playing it. And that was at a time when I hadn't really heard any music that I really liked for a while. So OK Computer by Radiohead, of course, was a classic album of its time. That's old now. I was reading a post about how old it is. Like, is it really that old? My goodness me. Yeah. So we played it to death on a tour in America, I remember, when it first came out. All sorts of things. Lots of things influenced me, even now, you know. I really also, my wife is really into ballet. And we go and see, or we used to, when you could, go and see Northern Ballet, and they have a great live orchestra with them wherever they tour and do things. So I quite like watching that. That's quite a thing. I think really my love of music pushed me on to wanting to. We had a piano in the house when I was a kid, so I was just learning anything I could. I didn't stop I started on piano before guitar, actually, if I'm honest. I had sort of 6 lessons, and I decided being taught something wasn't for me. I wanted to work things out for myself. And ever since then, I've always wanted to be creative. I decided that I didn't want to be that I didn't want to just learn things. I wanted to learn to be able to do it myself and take inspiration from the music I like and put it into somewhere, you know, put it into something new. That's what's always made me tick, really. But music takes up a lot of our time. You know, over the years we've spent a lot of time on the road and a lot of time just hanging about. As Charlie Watts famously says, you know, 25 years in the Rolling Stones at one point, he said. 5 years playing and 20 years hanging about. And that's about it, really. It's not as glamorous as it sounds, but outside habits, I read a lot. I was a slow reader as a kid because I didn't get it. It was hard work. And when I did finally get it, I realised that it was a great escapism that I enjoyed, just turning my mind off and going somewhere else. And I use music for that as well. I use music as an escapism. I go off to other places and make little films in my head, you know, when I'm listening to music. And I do a similar kind of thing when I'm reading books, I guess. So it's quite a creative process for me. Watching films. I love films. I can never remember what the films are that I love, but I watch quite a lot of them. It's like music these days on your iPod. I can't remember what the last thing I listened to was, or who it's by, or what album it's from. But when I was a kid, I had all of that stuff off. I could tell you what side of an album a song was from, and which track it was, you know. Oh, track 6, that is. Taxman, that will be track blah, blah, blah. I can't remember now, of course. But, yeah.
It was track 1, wasn't it? Taxman.
Taxman was track 1, yeah. Yes, correct. That is so, do you know, that's such a hard question for us. And I'm sure as a fan you must think, well, that's ridiculous. Or even if you're not a fan, you must think, well, surely they know all of this stuff because, you know, if you're a fan of a band, you listen to the music a lot. But I never listen to Marillion music, never, unless I'm working on it. If I've got to learn it, or if I want to learn it, if I want to put something on. And so quite often, when I'm in situations like if we're at Port Zealand or at a record signing, if we ever get back to doing those again, I'd be surprised when I hear a song I haven't heard for a while. I think, oh, Angelina, yeah, that's a lot better than I remember it being, you know. And so I had to actually go back and do a bit of homework on this question. And I decided that Marbles is quite an amazing album, actually. I'd forgotten how many good songs are on it. It's got Neverland, it's got Invisible Man, which is a massive statement, particularly live these days. And of course Ocean Cloud. And then it's got all the bits in between, things like all the little Marbles segments. I thought at the time, you know, they just made the album something more. You know, they gave the album a bit of sort of gravitas in a way. It's a big statement, that album. This is where I throw something at you, because naming your favourite Marillion song, sometimes it feels like you're cheating other songs, you know, if you name a particular song. And other times it's like, well, I sometimes want to, you know, kind of mix it up a bit and say something like, if I was a ball, if my heart were a ball, it would roll uphill. Because some of those songs that you would probably never think of as the best song we've ever done, and I probably wouldn't choose that, but they have amazing moments sometimes. And sometimes it's the moments within those songs that lead us on to going in other directions on other albums. So it's a hard one to choose. I'm gonna narrow it down now, and I think it's probably, I can't choose a favourite. It's down to one of two, and I'm choosing them both for the same reason, because they're both episodic journeys, if you like, and they both have lots of intricate music, really well crafted together. And that would be This Strange Engine. I think has some fantastic moments in it, and also Invisible Man, for the same reasons. Well, a long time ago we went to Brazil to do Hollywood Rocks, and we spent a week in Rio de Janeiro, and we went on a yacht out into the ocean, and we did all kinds of things, and it was just quite a surreal time, really. And you know, we were between Ipanema and the Copacabana beaches on in this hotel, and yeah, that's pretty memorable. I think that's pretty hard to get out of your memory. But there is a second one. There is a second memory, because this just blew our minds. And that was when the Finger Lights came on. And of course, the first time it happened, we didn't know it was happening. And I mean, we did it at the Royal Albert Hall. But the first time it happened at Port Zealand, it was, I think it was Port Zealand.
Leicester, I think.
Leicester. It was Leicester. First time it happened, I think it was Leicester. It just blew our minds. We had no idea it was happening. Thanks for watching Marillion's official YouTube channel. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell.